All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You guys know how this works. You send us the stuff you're digging into, and we dive deep. Today's topic comes to us from a listener who's been doing some research on a creature that I'll bet most of you have never even heard of.
Hmm. Yeah, that's probably right.
The European mink. Now, I'm not talking about fur coats here, folks. We're
Mhm.
talking about a real live animal that's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, in a lot of trouble.
Critically endangered, in fact. And the research that our listener sent over has some really interesting stuff in it, like did you know that one of the ways to identify a European mink is by the white patch on their chin and lips?
Oh, yeah, it's quite distinctive, like a little milk mustache.
Huh, exactly, a milk mustache. So cute. But here's the kicker, folks. It turns out the biggest threat to these little guys might not be what you think.
Yeah, it's not really who you'd expect.
So let's get into this, starting with a little background on the European mink. What are we dealing with here?
Well, it's a small, semi-aquatic carnivore, kind of like a ferret or a weasel,
Okay, got it.
native to Europe, as you might guess. And as you mentioned, they're critically endangered according to the IUCN.
Which is basically like the authority on these things, right?
Pretty much, yeah. They assess the conservation status of species all over the world.
Right, so critically endangered. That's pretty serious stuff.
Oh, yeah. It means they're facing an extremely high risk of extinction in the wild.
Wow. So this isn't just like, oh, they're a little bit rare. We're talking like on the brink here.
Exactly. And it's really sad because they used to be quite widespread across Europe, but now you'll only find them in these small, scattered populations, mostly in Eastern Europe and parts of Russia.
So like going from being as common as, say, squirrels to practically vanishing.
Yeah.
That's a huge decline.
Absolutely a dramatic decline.
So what happened? What pushed them to the edge like this?
Well, a lot of factors are at play, but habitat destruction is a major one.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we hear that a lot with endangered species.
Right. But for the European mink, it's particularly devastating because they rely so heavily on wetlands.
Oh, yeah, right. They're
Yeah.
semi-aquatic.
Exactly. So think riverbanks, marshes, those areas with dense vegetation along waterways. That's prime European mink real estate.
So what we're doing to the wetlands is basically like bulldozing their neighborhoods.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of wetlands have been drained and converted for agriculture or urban development,
Yeah.
and then there's industrial projects too, all taking a toll on their habitat.
And it's not just the physical space, right? I mean, messing with wetlands has got to have all sorts of knock-on
Oh,
effects.
absolutely. You're thinking about things like water pollution and deforestation.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you cut down trees upstream, doesn't that lead to more runoff and pollution downstream?
Exactly. Increased runoff carries all sorts of pollutants into the water, degrading the quality and harming the entire ecosystem.
And the European mink is right in the middle of that mess.
They are, and it affects their food sources too. Fewer fish, less prey overall. It's chain reaction.
Jeez, it's like their home is shrinking and what's left is getting contaminated. It's no wonder they're struggling.
Yeah. It's a tough situation, but there's another threat that's even more surprising.
Or yeah, this is where the story gets really interesting, right? You were telling me about this earlier, the unexpected villain in the European mink saga.
Yeah, and it might sound strange, but it's another mink.
Wait, what? There's another kind of mink?
Yep, the American mink.
Oh, come on, really? So it's like a mink eat mink world out there.
Uh-huh, you could say that. But seriously, the American mink is actually a big problem for the European mink.
So how did this American mink even get to Europe? Did it like swim across the Atlantic or something?
No, nothing quite so dramatic. It was actually brought to Europe by humans in the early 20th century.
No, so we're the bad guys in this story as usual.
Well, we certainly played a role. The American mink was introduced for fur farming, but some of them escaped. And, well, they're really good at adapting.
Ah, so they escaped and basically went wild.
And thrived.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, they've spread throughout much of Europe, and they're outcompeting the native European mink.
So how are they doing that? Are they just bigger and meaner or
Yes.
something?
Well, they are larger than European mink, but it's more than that. They're also more aggressive, more adaptable in terms of their diet, and they're not as picky about their habitat.
So they're basically like the super mink.
Haha. In a way, yeah, they can outcompete the European mink for food,
Yeah.
especially fish and crustaceans, and they're better at defending their territories.
Oh, man. So it's like the European mink is getting squeezed from all sides.
Sadly, yes, they're losing their habitat, and now they're facing this new competitor that's better equipped to survive in the changing environment.
Man, talk about bad luck. Poor little guys. But okay, so what are we doing about this invasive American mink? And can't we just like trap them all and send them back to America?
Huh. Wish it were that easy. Unfortunately, it's much more complicated than that. They're pretty well established now.
Yeah, that figures. So what can we do? Are there any success stories? Any strategies that seem to be working?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach, really, but there are some positive signs. One key strategy is habitat restoration, focusing on improving water quality and restoring those wetland areas.
So basically trying to make the European mink's home a better place.
Exactly. Create more favorable conditions for them to thrive.
And what about the American mink? Any way to get rid of them?
Well, there's no easy answer, but in some areas, they're doing carefully managed culling programs.
So like reducing their numbers to give the European mink a fighting chance.
Exactly, but it has to be done very carefully, to avoid unintended consequences.
Yeah, I can imagine there's got to be a lot of research and monitoring going on to make sure everything's balanced.
Absolutely. And there are organizations doing incredible work in this area, like the European Mink Conservation Program or EMCP.
The EMCP. Okay, so what are they doing exactly?
Well, they're involved in all aspects of conservation, from monitoring populations and studying mink behavior to tracking the effectiveness of different management strategies.
So they're like the mink detectives trying to figure out how to save these guys.
Ha ha ha. Yeah, that's one way to put it. But they're also working on captive breeding and reintroduction programs, which have shown some promise in certain areas.
Oh, that's good to hear. So they're basically raising European mink in a safe environment and then releasing them back into the wild.
Yep, exactly. And there have been some successful reintroductions in countries like Estonia and Spain.
Wow. So there is hope for the European mink then.
There is hope. It's a tough battle, but
Hmm.
with dedicated researchers and conservationists working on the problem, we can make a difference.
That's so awesome to hear because, man, this whole situation just makes me think about how interconnected everything is. Like one little change can have a ripple effect across an entire ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. And it highlights the importance of understanding these connections. We can't
Yeah.
just focus on one species in isolation. We have to consider the whole web of life.
Right. And it makes you realize that even if we don't live anywhere near these mink habitats, we can still play a role in their survival.
Exactly. Even small actions can have an impact. Things like supporting conservation organizations, spreading awareness about the European mink's plight, advocating for responsible land management practices.
Yeah, just being informed and engaged can make a difference.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
So to sum it all up, the European mink is facing some serious challenges. Habitat loss competition from the invasive American mink, but there is hope with ongoing conservation efforts and growing awareness. We might just be able to turn things around.
I agree. And the more we learn about the threats they face, the better equipped we are to find solutions.
Well said. So for all of you listening out there, if this story has sparked your curiosity, go do some digging of your own, learn more about the European mink and the organizations working to protect them. You never know what you might discover.
That's right. And you might even find ways to get involved yourself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the European mink. It's been an eye-opening journey, and it leaves me wondering what the future holds for this fascinating creature. Will they be able to bounce back and reclaim their place in Europe's ecosystems? I guess only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, their story is a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting our planet's biodiversity.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, folks, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
See you then.